Welcome to year 2 of A Mick, a Mook, and a Mike.
Hosted by 4-time Emmy-nominated producer
Frank Pace. And retired New York City firefighter, 9/11 first responder, and Vietnam vet, Billy O'Connor. Brought to you by We Can Coffee Company, manufacturer of freshly roasted premium coffee blends delivered directly to your door.
This week's guest, Frank Sinatra confidant, Tony Oppedisano. A look back at his 30-year friendship with the chairman of the board.
My brother
Frankie, how are you today, pal?
I'm great because we've got a special guest in studio with us today. Let me read something off the back of his book by a fella by the name of Michael Bublé, 4-time Grammy Award-winning artist. He says, "The legend that is Frank Sinatra remains a fascinating topic. Tony O had a deep and abiding friendship with Old Blue Eyes and an all-access pass to his life. We are fortunate that he chose to share these intimate recollections with us. Our guest, Tony Oppedisano. Tony O. Welcome, Tony."
Thank you.
Well, we're on it. We're on it to have you today, brother. We couldn't get Frank, obviously, so we're delighted to have you.
Yeah, he's a little busy.
23 years too late.
He's doing a continuous in a different place.
Yeah,
I guess
he's playing golf today. He's 6 under.
Oh, whoa, wait.
Brutal. I was going to say he's taking a dirt nap, but that's wrong.
But that's terrific, man, that your book is out.
It's entitled Sinatra and Me in the wee small hours of the morning. It's a terrific read.
Thank you.
You know, we had Tony on before the book was out, and we were lavishing praise on it then because of the unlimited access you had with Frank over the last 20 years of his life. Now that we've read the book, we had to have you back again.
Oh, thank you. It's much
Yeah,
appreciated.
you're the only guest we've ever had twice, and you're a great storyteller. And to have you, of course, who you're telling a story about, it's what's at stake, you know. And Sinatra, I mean, who else could claim to have a #1 hit in the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s? I mean, just incredible.
Yep. 6, 7 decades, actually.
Wow.
Seven decades. So
decades.
tell me.
His first was in 1939, believe it or not.
1939 was his first #1 hit?
First hit. Yeah.
Wow, first big one. And what was that first big one?
Oh, geez, I don't remember.
Uh-huh.
I wasn't there.
You were sick of you. But tell me, now that the book is out, you've been doing a lot of promotion, and tell us something about the...
I've been doing a lot of interviews, a lot of Zoom interviews, crowdcasts, and the book was released in the middle of August in the last market that it had not yet been available, which is the UK and Europe. And that's been interesting because I was doing interviews at 3 o'clock in the morning here, California time, so that it would be prime time over there.
That's 8 hours.
8 hours.
8 hours, yeah, ahead of us, yeah.
I know you took a long time to write the book, and I know you were reticent about writing the book. That means, you know.
Thanks, Frank.
It's a dessert.
Why did you decide to finally write the book?
You know, I had promised him that I was going to do it because of all of the perpetuated, exaggerated myths that were attached to his career. And sometimes he would tell me the true story about something, and I'd say, "Well, Frank, why didn't you ever straighten that out?" He says, "Tony," he says, "first of all, people seem to prefer the romanticized version." He says, "and the others, I found the hard way," he says, about dealing with the press. He says, "I could just picture myself trying to tell the true story about something and some members of the press going, 'Yeah, Frank, nice try.'" I said, "Yeah, but the truth is the truth." He says, "You feel that passionate about it, you fix it." I said,
Wow.
"I will."
Wow, so
I
he had
will.
actually told you, you feel that way about it, you fix
You
it.
fix
write
it,
write
yeah.
the book.
So what's one of those stories?
Oh, God. I guess the predominant one would be how he got out of his contract with Tommy Dorsey.
Really?
I mean, the perpetuated myth is what ended up in the movie The Godfather with Johnny Fontaine, the Al Martino character, where, you know, mob guys went into the band leader's office and stuck a gun in his mouth and said, "Either your signature or your blood is going to be on the paper." That's nowhere near the truth.
Really?
Oh, not at all.
What was
I mean, it was a very usurious contract, unfortunately, between what he was paying Tommy and what he was paying Tommy's lawyer. And at the same time, he had a new manager. He had an agent. And the IRS, he was in arrears to the IRS. At the end of the day, he was probably taking home 7 cents on a dollar.
Wow.
And it was just getting impossible for him to continue. I mean, he had a wife, he had Nancy Sr., and at the time he had a daughter, only Nancy. And he just couldn't continue to live like that. And Lou Wasserman is the guy that helped facilitate getting him out of that deal.
Lou Wasserman was an Uber agent who became head of Universal Studios.
Right. Yep.
So it was the agent and not the mob that had anything to do with it.
Had nothing to do with it whatsoever. Yeah, they made a straight ahead deal with the agency that was handling him, and he signed them to a record deal, and they got an advance on the record deal, and he also had a clause put in Frank's contract that he would be able to do 1 or 2 movies outside of the studio that he was signed to. And so when they made those films, they paid the money back in a minute. I mean, they basically offered Tommy what in the exchange of the dollars from then to today, somewhere in the neighborhood of $750,000 in cash.
Wow, that's a lot of money.
And if by then, big bands were beginning to fall, go by the wayside, and Tommy wasn't getting the kind of work that he had once gotten, and so he took the money and ran.
So,
Go ahead, sorry.
so that was in the 40s, I would imagine.
Yeah.
At the height of Frank's career, then he became the teenage Bobby Sox idol.
Yeah.
What were those days?
One of the first.
What were those days like for Frank to be the center of all sorts of attention?
It was very surreal, and it really blew him away. I mean, when he told me when he walked out onto the stage at the Paramount in front of the Benny Goodman Orchestra, and the girls and everybody went nuts. I mean, it just hit him like a wall of. He just turned around to Benny Goodman. He said, "What the hell was that?" As a matter of fact, there's a lot of times he said he couldn't even hear himself singing because the girls were screaming so loud.
And he still considered himself a saloon singer, really. He
Yeah.
didn't really consider himself an idol. But
Yeah, and the funny thing was Manny Sachs, who was his PR guy, he was the Rock of Gibraltar in Frank's life. He was one of the guys, along with Lou Wasserman, who helped get him out of the deal with Tommy Dorsey. He had paid a couple of the girls, maybe 8 or 10 of them, to do that.
oh,
But the rest of them were there just because they had become fans. So it started out as a gimmick, but it went crazy.
And how long did that idolization last?
All the way through, probably a good 2-3 years at least. And then, when his marriage began to fall apart because he was getting involved with Ava Gardner, and that took its toll on him. I mean, she drove him nuts. She really did. And he said, "I should have known that anything that burned that hot was going to burn out." He said, "But I was having a blast while it lasted." He said, "But, I knew she was something else," he said, "because she could drink more than I could." He says, "and some of the language that came out of her mouth could grow hair on the wall." He said, so.
Yeah, it sounds like Ava was a real dame. In the parlance of that days, that was a compliment.
Yeah, she was.
on the get back to you clearing up the myths. In The Godfather, the famous scene, of course, with the horse in the bed and Sinatra getting the part from Here to Eternity, and the producer saying that he took the best piece of ass I ever had. That was meant to be Ava Gardner, obviously, right?
Yeah.
What about the truth to that? The scene about the mob getting him that part from Here to Eternity. Ava Gardner had more to do with it.
They had nothing to do with it whatsoever.
Ava Gardner had more to do with it.
Ava had more to do with it than anybody. She was friends with Harry Cohen's wife, and he was the head of the studio at the time. There was a rift between Frank and Harry that the general public was not aware of. In Frank's days with the big band, Harry was what they called a song plugger, where they would sign a bunch of composers to a contract, and they would take the best of the best that these guys had written and try to get people who had visibility to not only perform but record their songs. And as Frank said, I liked Harry. He says, but I couldn't take much of his material because all the stuff he had was
Crap.
kind of crap.
Mediocre. Yeah.
So it was a kind of a grudge, and that's why when he approached Harry, he said, "Nah, you're a song and dance man. I need a real actor for this part."
Oh.
And he wouldn't even give him a screen test.
Well, Tony, isn't it true that Frank's career was sort of on the decline before he got From Here to Eternity?
Yes.
And Ava was hot as a pistol, and they wanted to keep Ava happy as much as anything else. They figured, what the hell, we'll give him. I mean, isn't it true? I heard that they figured, we'll give him an audition, and then it will
and shut him up.
to shut him up.
Yeah.
But then he was brilliant.
Yeah, they were actually supposedly already in contract negotiations with Eli Wallach to play that role. But Frank ad-libbed something, which is what the director told him to do. He said, if you feel that strongly about this character that you can identify with him, Maggio, then show me Maggio. And the scene that he did as a screen test was in a bar. He was supposedly half in the bag. And he ad-libbed. He reached over to the condiment tray and picked up a couple of olives, and he rolled them down the bar like they were dice. And that's what pretty much got him the role. The director said, you know what? He really is Maggio.
And
They never looked back.
He proved them to be brilliant. Brilliant casting.
Absolutely. Academy Award.
Yep.
Yeah, and deservedly so. He was Maggio. He was terrific in the part. But it strikes me that so many teen idols, especially, like people that go out and wow teenagers, of course, they try and take advantage of it, like Elvis and everything else, and put them in movies. But Sinatra really was a really good actor. The Man with the Golden Arm is terrific.
Yeah.
And he really stretched in that, where he plays the heroin addict.
Yeah, he should have gotten an Academy Award for that.
He was
really
terrific in that.
The ironic thing is, years and years later, I helped to resurrect his friendship with Ernie Borgnine. They were really good pals.
They had a split?
From Here to Eternity, they were really good pals. But in later years, Ernie's wife, Tova, did not get along that well with Barbara Sinatra. And so they didn't spend any time together. Frank hadn't seen Ernie in about 10 years. And so ironically, we used to have those boys' nights where it was just be the guys, and the wives would go off and do something else. And so I arranged for Ernie to come to Frank's house at the beach. A buddy of mine, Larry Minetti, was really close to Ernie. And I said, just pick him up, tell him you're taking him out to dinner. Don't tell him where you're going.
And Larry Minetti was the star of the original, he was a helicopter pilot in the original Magnum PI, correct?
He was a nightclub owner.
Oh, nightclub owner, right.
Yeah.
And by the beach, take him to the house by the beach was where?
This was Frank's house on Broad Beach Road.
Broad Beach, okay.
Yeah. So Ernie shows up at the house, and it was like no time had passed whatsoever. They were like two kids in a schoolyard. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because you were talking about Man with a Golden Arm. We sat by the bar, and I was behind the bar, and the two of them were talking. And there was a lull in the conversation, and I said to Frank, you really are a very generous man. And he looked at me and he says, what are you talking about? I said, well, considering that this man stole your Academy Award. And Frank looked at him and he says, yeah, you fat bum. He says, you play a guy that couldn't get laid in a women's penitentiary with a handful of pardons. He says, and I slit my throat and everything else. He says, you walked away with my goddamn statue. And Ernie looked at me and he says, thanks, Tony.
Was Borgnine, he was an East Coast guy, right? Was he from New York?
Italy.
From Italy.
He was born in Italy.
He was born in Italy, really?
Yeah.
I was telling Frank I had a problem like last night with a hospital, and my wife just had an operation. I had a problem with the hospital, and it was like something out of the Patty Chayefsky novel, the hospital.
Patty who?
Patty Chayefsky.
Patty who?
Chayefsky. Chayefsky?
I don't even. Chayefsky? You screwed me up so much. I can't even say Chayefsky.
Patty
Chayefsky.
Well, he wrote Marty, right? He wrote The Borgnine. The Borgnine got his Academy Award for him, Patty.
He wrote that?
Yeah, he wrote Marty.
Patty who? Chayefsky.
Chayefsky.
Some Polish guy. I don't
Some
know.
Polish guy, yeah, you know.
Holy
Well, he wrote
crap.
Marty, right? So that, but I had a problem with the hospital. I was thinking I was in the movie hospital, but poor guy, yeah, he was born in Italy. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I thought he was like an East Coast guy.
Yeah.
He is very East Coast.
Yeah.
That's about as East Coast as you get. Yeah, but he was a terrific actor, and
Yeah, he was.
And
He
Jesus.
was.
Well,
and he carried that over into his singing. I mean, that's his approach to finding music was, I mean, obviously the melody had to be nice, but for him, he said the lyric was the most important part. He said, because I had to find stuff where the lyrics were reflective of something that I could tap into in my own life so that I could bring even more depth to the lyric as I'm singing it. Like an actor does. They always tap into some personal experience in order to lend more depth to the role. And that's basically what he did with his voice when he was singing. Same thing.
That's almost verbatim what you wrote in the book.
Oh, wow.
Well,
That's
you know
almost-
what? So many people have said that. You know, watching Sinatra is like watching him sing for you alone.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody gets an impression like he's singing to you and
Yeah.
not to an audience.
And he was famous for his breath control. Why don't you tell us a little
Oh.
about how he practiced that?
Absolutely. I mean, he came up with that. He just said, you never realize what you're going to say until a split second before it comes out of your mouth, but yet you never run out of air until you've completed your thought, like just now.
Mm-hmm.
Whoa.
He said, so then why, if you know ahead of time what you're going to be singing, why do you need to breathe in the middle of a phrase? And he used to practice that. He would swim, but he would swim underwater. And in his mind, he would pick out a tune and a lyric and count off a tempo in his head, take the breath, go underneath. If he had to come up before he finished the phrase, then he figured, okay, I got to work on that some more. And that's something that I literally stole from him as a vocalist. Same thing.
Wow.
You should be able to complete your thought in one breath, unbroken.
That's remarkable.
As opposed to some of the singers these days who breathe in the middle of a word.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Frank was interested in vocal techniques, and he asked Maria Callas one night how she warmed up her throat.
Yes.
Why don't you tell us about that? Because you were there.
Yes. He asked her. He asked her, how do you warm up before a show? She said, well, usually because I'm in performances where there are backup singers, male and female. She said, I try to find the youngest, best-looking chorus boy, and I bring him into my dressing room, and I deep throat him, and it relaxes all the muscles in my throat. And Frank said, well, that's something I ain't going to be doing.
No wonder Onassis was chasing her around, huh? She could probably hold the breath a long time.
Yeah, well,
Maria Callas, I mean...
she was in the parlance, as we was talking about before. Today it's politically incorrect, but she was what they would call a great broad. I mean, she could be very sophisticated and very classy, but yet she could hang out with the guys, not be offended by something they said. And
Well, that's interesting you say that, because I think Nancy Sr. was like that a little bit. And I know that Ava was a great broad. But then Mia was not so much a great broad, nor was Barbara Sinatra a great broad. How did he pick such diverse women?
well, Mia, according to what he told me, she pursued him, and he was, I think he was shooting Von Ryan's Express, and they were doing some pickups on the studio lot, and she was doing what the hell was that show she was on? I'm trying to remember.
Peyton Place.
Peyton Place. And she pursued him. And she says, she ran into him coming out of a soundstage one day. And she said, where are you headed? He says, I'm going back down to the desert. She says, well, you got room on the jet?
Wow.
I mean, he did feel a little strange about it because she was around the same age as his daughter.
Yeah.
But again, another one that he said, hey, I knew it probably wasn't going to last. He says, but
Why not?
I was having a ball.
Okay, so that brings me to another point in the book. Rowan. You said that Rowan is not his son. Is that correct? I mean, if you do the math, he's not his son.
Ronan?
Ronan. Ronan Farrow.
Well, I mean, he was conceived in, I'm pretty sure it was March, had to be March of 87.
Right.
Okay. At the time, as I put in the book, not only was Frank very much on the road with Barbara in attendance, but during the period before, he had an emergency surgery, as I put in the book. He had diverticulitis, and they took about 8 feet of his intestines, and he had a colostomy bag. And being impetuous the way he could be, he was about to shoot an episode of Magnum because he had befriended Larry Minetti from years ago. Larry Minetti's father was a wise guy in Chicago.
This is the helicopter pilot.
No, the bar owner.
The bar owner.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. At any rate, he was a fan of the show, and they wrote an episode for him. So he flew over to Hawaii, but he had the doctors remove the colostomy bag earlier than they should have. And when he came back, he ended up back in the hospital with a severe infection, and he had to have the colostomy bag put back on. And so during the period that Ronan would have been conceived, Mia and Frank were on separate coasts. He was on the West Coast. She was on the East Coast. If memory serves, she was shooting a movie at she and Woody's home in Connecticut. I think the movie was called September. And so they were 3,000 miles apart.
And they had been separated for a while by then.
Oh, yeah. They split in 68. They were about there. I mean, they remained friends, but not that way.
Right.
Not that way.
So there was no way. I know that the famous disparaging remark that Ava Gardner had made when she found out that Mia Farrow was marrying Sinatra was, I never figured Frank ended up in bed with a boy.
Yeah.
Well, I put the story in there, what she said. Well, I met her very briefly at Jilly's, and I can't use the word, but
yeah, you can.
I mentioned, I said to her, I said, listen, I don't know when I'm ever going to be in your company again. I said, and I'm really curious about something. And she said, sure, what do you want to know? I said, I'm just wondering, given the intensity of your relationship with Frank when you guys were together, what did you think when he took up with Mia? And she said to me, well, you're an Italian-American. I said, yeah. But you're born and raised in Brooklyn. I said, yeah. She said, so you and Frank, even though you're decades apart in age, you grew up similar to what he was, where the only time you were with a girl, it was either a relative or it was someone you were looking to pop. Most of the other time you spent hanging out with your friends, and no one ever thought that, hanging out with all these guys that you were gay. It just didn't, no one conceived of anything like that. I said, yeah. She said, well, when I saw him pick up with Mia, I figured, he finally found something he's been looking for his whole life. A boy with a...
Wow.
Yeah.
So
Jilly and I looked at each other and went, okay.
So you mentioned Jilly. Jilly was your best friend before Frank, and Jilly Rizzo. And why don't you tell us a little bit about your relationship with Jilly and your threesome with Jilly and Frank?
Yeah, he was a force of nature, Jilly Rizzo. Jilly was, as I wrote in the foreword to a book that his son had written about him, he was not a very book-learned man, but yet he could give a postgraduate dissertation in street smarts. He was very sharp, like you, Billy.
Just not sharp. But Jilly, yeah, I'm interested because the saloon owner, I mean, he was like the consummate saloon owner. So.
Absolutely. And yet, at the same time, if he was your friend, you didn't feel like you needed any other friend in the world because he was that big of a person. And at the end of the day, he was a bit of a pushover, too. He was a softie, kind of like Frank. All bark, no bite, unless you pushed him too far, then look out.
So he was Toots Shaw before Toots Shaw.
Absolutely.
And he introduced you to Frank?
I met Jilly. It's a too long of a story, but I met Jilly because of Jilly's older brother, another Frank, who actually ran the club in Jilly's absence. And I hit it off with Uncle Frank, and he said, I got to introduce you to my brother. And when I met Jilly, he finally came back into town. He was on the road with Sinatra. And when he finally came back into town, his apartment was upstairs from the club, 256 West 52nd Street, next door to what is now the Neil Simon Theater. At the time, it was the Alvin Theater. At any rate, the bar was full of people, 3 deep at the bar, and there was someone else meeting him that needed to talk to him about something that night. And I knew that Jilly had a bad eye, but I didn't know which one it was. So he finally comes down from his apartment, and I'm standing at the bar with my back looking at the pictures on the wall behind the bar. And Uncle Frank says, Jilly, this is that fella I wanted you to meet. This is Tony Oppedisano. It's Jilly Rizzo. And I shook his hand, and he was starting to talk to the other guy. And I'm sipping my drink, and I'm looking at these photographs. And Jilly says, so how you doing? And I didn't say anything. A couple of minutes later, he goes, so you working or what? I still didn't say anything to him. So now he slaps me on the shoulder. He says, what are you, deep or something? I'm talking to you. I said, Jilly, I'm sorry. I knew you had a bad blinker. I didn't know if it was this one or that one. I thought you were talking to him. I didn't want to interrupt you. And he said, I like this kid.
So it was Jilly's, for those of us, of course, who were never in the place, what kind of a saloon was it? Was it a ball and a beer joint? Was it an entertainment place? Was it food?
It was a quintessential jazz club, but a very unique place. It had a low ceiling, so there was kind of an electric aura in the room, and it had such an eclectic group of people that used to populate it. I mean,
it sort of sounds like the basement of Smith and Walensky's.
I'm telling you, at one table
in New York,
there would be a senator. At another table would be Van Cliburn and Maria Callas. Right. At another table, as Jilly used to put it, there's 20 years of good behavior sitting over there.
So it was like Tortulas in that respect.
Great spot. And the music was phenomenal. A lot of great people came out of there. Peter Nero came out of there.
Wow. So it was designed for the music, though. It was designed...
Yeah, because Jilly was a frustrated saxophone player. Yeah. And so he loved, and he had a great ear for music. And, I mean, the first club was on 48th Street. And but he moved because the rent was going through the ceiling, and he found the place. It was it belonged to Billy Daniels originally. It was called the Black Magic Room.
Billy Daniels was a black jazz singer, right?
Yeah,
black man.
Right. Black man, excuse me, jazz singer. You guinea prick.
Inside joke.
Hence the name of the show, folks.
Exactly. Good one.
So
yeah, Billy Daniels.
Jilly took a liking to you, obviously.
Yeah, and Jilly, as Frank said, was like the brother that Frank never had. Frank was an only child. And when Jilly befriended Frank, it was at a point in Frank's life and career where there was nothing to be gained. His career was in the toilet. His life was a mess. It was upside down. He had just divorced Nancy, and his world with Ava fell apart. And the only work he was getting was being shored up by the wise guys, because back then they owned most of the clubs. So they made sure that he had plenty of work. He worked in Chicago. He worked at the Copa in New York. He worked at the Fontainebleau down in Florida. And then after he had eternity, then it started spinning again. But when he befriended Jilly, he was on the skids. He could walk through Times Square. Nobody would even turn around unless they went, geez, look how bad he looks. It was terrible.
And that was that period of time that he was rumored to have tried to commit suicide, but
yeah, supposedly.
Supposedly, but you don't think that's true?
Nah. He treasured life too much to do something like that. I mean, he may have fired a pistol into the air on the phone to get someone's attention, to let her think that he was trying to commit suicide. Yeah. But no. So Jilly and he were like brothers, really. And Jilly waited almost a full year before he found the wherewithal to introduce me to Frank. He wanted to get to know me in retrospect.
Oh yeah.
It's because a lot of people that were around Frank, everyone had an
Ulterior
ulterior
motive.
motive.
Ulterior
Yep.
motive.
You know,
Yep.
So he was the gatekeeper.
absolutely.
So what was it like for you the first time you met Frank? And I think that also included performers, didn't it?
Yeah,
Because you were an up and coming singer.
and I was working at the club
Right.
as a jazz guitarist and a singer, and I fortunately caught the tail end of the nightclub business, and I was able to play all the really great rooms like Barney Google's, and I even played the Copacabana Lounge, believe it or not. And Jilly's was the mainstay, Joe's Pier 52,
Wow.
Danny's Hideaway, all really great spots. I was very
The
fortunate.
Copa was hopping in them days, man.
The
That was
Copa
the spot,
was
right?
the place, yeah. And this was just before Jules Podell passed away. So it was like 1972, 73, thereabouts. Jack and Trotter had already moved out to Vegas. So Jules became the boss at the Copa. But Jilly was a man about town, and Frank is looking out and saying, why are they making such a big fuss over this guy? Who the hell is this guy? And so they told him, well, he's got a great club over on 52nd Street, and he's a really sweet man. And before you know it, Jilly was showing up at a lot of Frank's engagements, and they formed a bond that lasted until he passed away in 92. Yeah.
Wow.
So the first time you performed for Frank was, what was that like?
December 8th, 1972. Frank was in the middle of his self-imposed retirement. He decided to walk away from the business for a while to take a breather and spend more time with his family and his friends. And in later years, he told me also that the other part of the reason he walked away was that he wasn't convinced that he was still relevant to my generation, given how the music business had changed. And Jilly called me, and he said, listen, don't talk it up, he says, but the old man's coming into town. Frank Jr. is appearing at the Rainbow Room, Rockefeller Center, and he's going to go to the midnight show on Friday night. Are you in town gigging? I said, yeah, I got a gig, but I'm done early, thankfully. He said, well, why don't you come over there? He says, it's time. He said, I think you and he would be a good fit, and I want to introduce you to him. Okay. So I made arrangements to go to the show, the midnight show, and I stopped off earlier in the afternoon, and I tipped a maitre d'. And I arrived about 5 minutes after the show had started, and they wanted to bring me right to my table. I said, no, let the man finish the song first. It's rude. And as soon as the tune was over, he says, okay, go. And the waiter's carrying a table through the crowd. I'm the only one in a tuxedo in the room, because I wore a tuxedo 6 nights a week back then. And I'm thinking, oh my God. And I'm sitting down, and now he comes over to take my drink water. Frank Jr. is standing on the stage looking at me like, can I continue? Is it all right with you?
Well, yeah.
So finally, the focus went back up on the stage, and I'm looking around the room, and there I saw Frank's profile against the backdrop of the fog in the windows. We were up on the 60th floor. And I didn't get to meet him there, but later, as they were leaving after the show was over, Jilly said, I'll see you back at the joint. And so I made my way back over to the club, which was, again, 4 deep at the bar, especially that people knew Frank was in town. They knew sooner or later, every night, he'd show up there at some point. And I was sitting at the piano bar because the guys that were playing were friends of mine, Joe Patrone and Lou Berryman, bass player, piano player. And all of a sudden I hear this ruckus, and Frank had arrived. And he's walking, pushing his way through the crowd. And as he gets close to the piano, I said to him in Italian, ma quando ragazzi da Baccano, what a ruckus. And I cleaned that up. and he laughed. And anyway, about an hour or so later, I asked the lead waiter, this guy, Johnny Smash was his nickname, John Bianculli. And I said, listen, it's getting a little crazy in here. I said, I don't know if Jilly's going to be able to introduce me to Frank. I said, and I hate to be a civilian. I said, but when you get a chance, I said, see if you get Frank to give me an autograph, because I don't think I'm going to get to meet him tonight. He said, yeah, sure. So a little while later, I see him walk over to Frank, and he hands him a menu. And evidently, Frank said, "Who's this for?" Because all of a sudden, I see Frank leaning around Bianculli, and Bianculli's pointing at me. And 2 minutes later, Bianculli walks over to me and he says, I don't understand what the hell this is about. I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "This man's been coming in here," he says, "for so many years." He said, "I've never seen him sign his name like this." And he put on there, "Hi, Tony, all the best, Frank Sinatra, Sr." That's way of saying, I saw you over there.
Oh, yeah, I saw the whole deal, yeah. Very pleasant.
So about a half hour later, Jilly decided to close the club right at 4 o'clock. And
that's unusual, I would imagine.
Well, because he used to, back then, it's not like in California. You could, on last call, you could order 2 rounds.
Right, and back yourself up,
and sit there and drink. As long as no money was being passed after 4 o'clock, it was okay. Right. And sometimes Jilly would hang out till 5:30. But some nights when he wanted to do something else, he'd put the air conditioning up, turn up the lights, and walk over to, he'd have the waiters walk over to people and say, "Excuse me, sir, would you mind standing up?" They stand up, he'd take the chair, turn it upside down, put it on the table. So it's like, in other words, get the hell out of here. So this night, Jilly comes over to me and he says, "So how'd your gig go?" I said, "Good." And he says, "You got your axe, your guitar in the car?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "Good, go get it. I want him to hear you play." And I'm going, "Oh, geez. Okay, I've been drinking all night long." And he chased everyone out. And I come back in, and all of a sudden, Frank is sitting at the piano across from where I was sitting. And the club was empty. It was just Uncle Frank behind the bar, Jilly, Frank, some girl who I never met, and us musicians, and John Bianculli, the waiter.
Talk about pressure.
Yeah. So, as nightclub performers do, Joe Patrone was calling tunes, counting off a tempo and a key. But you go and you do it. Head arrangements. So about 6 tunes into this, he says, "Tony," he says, "why don't you do something on guitar by yourself, like Bucky Pizzarelli or Tony Mottola?" I said, "Joe, pass." Okay. So I'm thinking, what the hell tune could I do? So I started to play a tune that I knew Frank had an affinity for, that he had recorded a couple of years earlier, a tune by Antonio Carlos Jobim called "How Insensitive." And I start playing, and all of a sudden, I hear him humming, and I almost dropped the guitar. Then he goes from humming to singing. Now I'm accompanying him.
Whoa.
And we did the tune, played it out like we had rehearsed it.
Magic.
And he was sitting there with his eyes closed, singing. And when the tune was over, he looked over and he says, "Nice job, kid." I said, "Thank you, Mr. Sinatra." He says, I'm no Alveola, but I try." And he looks at Jilly. He says, "How the hell does this kid know who Alveola had been Frank's longtime guitarist forever."
Wow.
And that was the beginning. That was the beginning. We hit it off. Jilly was right. We were a good fit, even though he was 36 years older than me. We had a lot in common.
Yeah, a lot in common. Exactly.
Yeah.
And you spoke the same language.
Yeah.
And
all 3 of them.
Yeah, and maybe 4 with the music, maybe 4.
Really.
So let me ask you some of Frank's favorites. What was Frank's favorite song to listen to and to sing?
As Frank would say, again, politically incorrect, he said, "That's like asking a fat man what's his favorite food." But if I had to pick one, I would say Laura. Laura.
Laughing face?
Beautiful. No, that's Nancy.
That's Nancy with laughing face.
Laura was a very haunting, beautiful, beautiful melody, great lyric. And it's a ballad that he recorded 2 different times. That was probably his single favorite song.
Wow.
His favorite color?
Orange.
Orange. That's unique. That's a unique.
He said color. He said, as far as he's concerned, it was the happiest color he ever saw.
Wow.
Orange.
Wow. Well, these two could never pick orange or any color, really.
Well, because I'm colorblind.
As am I.
This shirt, I put on this shirt to match these pants, and when I got on a light, I think it's a blue shirt.
It's blue.
Yeah, I didn't know that until I got down here. How about his favorite drink?
The go-to drink, by way of Jackie Gleason, Jackie's the one who introduced him to it, was Jack Daniels and water. Which is another ironic story, because the first time I was at the house in the desert, we were waiting for Jilly to come around the corner, and I went on ahead, and Frank walked behind the bar, And he took 2 buckets, filled the ice, and he had the bottle of Jack in his hand. And he says, I know you drink Jack, how do you take it? And I said, on the rocks. And he looked at me and he says, what, are you trying to be a hero or something, for Christ's sake? He says, try it with a little water. He says, it tastes better and you get where you're going without getting hurt along the way.
Spoken like a true guy who's been around enough saloons to know.
Really.
And didn't you also monitor Frank's drinking a little bit? Because it seemed like his glass always seemed to be full and he always seemed to be drinking. What's the story behind that?
Yeah, what I tried to do in later years, especially on stage, I would put a drink in the piano for him because they used to leave the lid open just enough. And I used to fill the glass with ice and put 3 fingers at least of water and float the Jack on the top. Similar to what I used to do with Rickles when we were doing TV shows, especially talk shows. I would get a coffee cup like that from the stage crew and fill it with ice, and fill it with water, and float the vodka on the top. So the first thing he tasted was booze. Then after that, you don't taste it. You don't taste the difference.
Don was a vodka
anyway.
And water guy?
Trying to keep him. No, he was vodka rocks.
Vodka straight up.
Vodka, yeah, vodka
I
rocks.
believe with olives.
Yeah, or a lemon twist.
A lemon twist.
But he would drink vodka straight. Like, well, so do I. But when you're doing a TV show, you know, the last thing I need is getting whacked on stage.
So that's a great segue into Sinatra and Rickles.
Yeah.
How did you get in touch? That's when Tony and I met.
Yeah.
Because I was producing Daddy Dearest for Fox, and Tony was representing Don, who was our star, and he was representing Frank at the same time.
Yeah, yeah. There was a 3-year period where I was working with both of them, and I ended up with Rickles 24 years. Believe it or not. Yeah. And people used to say to me, so let me ask you, let me get this right. You represented Sinatra and you represented Rickles, and for 3 years you were working with both of them? I said, uh-huh. I said, what was that like? I said, well, let me put it to you this way. At one point in my life, I was 6'2" and had a full head of hair. But they were both sweethearts, absolute sweethearts.
Yeah.
And I met Rickles in 1980. I was still performing. I was on the contract at Harris in Lake Tahoe. And he was working, as he used to like to say, he was working in the big room. And I was working the State Line Cabaret. He was working at this point in time, he was working with a new act. He used to have a lot of up-and-coming people work in front of him. And this particular engagement, he had Sister Sledge in front of him. And then later on that same year,
I don't even want to think about some of the comments he had for Sister Sledge.
No, no. And later on that same year, he had this other new up and coming singer by the name of Patti LaBelle working for him. So anyway, here I am under contract at Harris in Lake Tahoe, and the entertainment director, Bob McClure, suggested that Don introduced me. On my night off, I went in to see Don's show. I was working the State Line Cabaret with my band. And so they were trying to promote my career. So McClure gave Rickles my name. And he said at that point, at the end of the show, when he used to introduce celebrities in the audience, he says, I want to introduce this kid. We're trying to push him. It's okay. So he comes around to introducing me. And he says, and we have a young entertainer in the audience, a really good singer and a musician, Tony, Hop in the Sauna? How the hell
Yep.
Perfect.
That was the best he could do in pronouncing Oppedisano.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Hop in the Sauna.
You know, that reminds me of a story that we told in If These Lips Could Talk. We were going into Atlantic City, and Donna was doing a show there. So I was going a baseball card show with Rod Carew. So I said, I'll call Tony O and get us a couple tickets. So I said, Tony, it's Frank. And he says, Frank, anything you want. Just anything you want. So he got us the great seats. And after the show, as is tradition, Don always introduces celebrities in the crowd. So he says, ladies and gentlemen, we're proud to have in our audience tonight a great American hero, a man that's got 3,000 hits, a man that's in the Baseball Hall of Fame, 1967 Rookie of the Year, 1977 Most Valuable Player, the great Rod Carew. Everybody laughs, everybody claps, Rod stands up and cheers. And he says, and he's here with Frank Pace, who's a fag from the FBI. Now, nothing about that, no word in that is funny. But when coming out of Don's mouth, it was the ultimate compliment.
There you go.
Frank said that in the book. He said when we wrote it, he says, if you look at what Rickles says, it's not that funny. It's just, it's Rickles.
The attitude.
Yeah, the attitude. Yeah.
Well, we got a chance to work with Don and Frank Sinatra on Daddy Dearest.
Yeah.
It was a great experience. I think Derek is looking forward to getting it queued up.
Okay, Frank, we're finished. This is Mr. Sinatra. You might have seen him.
Hi, I'm Howard Stone. Saw you last night. You were wonderful.
Richard Lewis. Where's Richard?
Richard, I'm rehearsing my line. You wear a tie for this bit?
No, it has nothing to do with you, Frank. This is you're not even in this. You're just going to stand on the side.
Shit.
I'm just going to throw the camera on you and hope to God that people remember who you are. Okay, Howard, tell him what you told me you were going to tell him.
Change for another shot.
No, Frank, you look perfect. You can wait. Stay in your underwear. We don't care.
Well, okay, you're right here.
Yeah.
You do your line to the two, they'll walk into the shot, it becomes a 3-shot. You have a single of you do your line, and then turn and we'll just walk out.
Okay.
Okay? We have a cue card here.
Let's through a little bit.
Yeah, let's walk it. Okay. Okay, here we go. This is rehearsal.
Stay away from my wife.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay? Rehearsal. Stand by. Can you see these two?
Yes, I can.
Okay. And background.
Hey, now that's an attractive woman.
No, not again.
It can't hurt to talk to her.
Hey, meathead. You better stay away from my wife.
Jesus Christ, you're great.
That's what we have to do. And if you'll just turn and exit, okay? After taking my life. Okay, here we go.
By the way, notice he's chewing gum.
Jesus, what you do for your friends. All this hard work all the time. We all set? Stand by and background.
Hey, now that's an attractive woman.
No, not again.
It can't hurt to talk to her.
Hey, meathead, stay away from my wife. And clear. See you tomorrow. Good for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Frank.
We got it.
Listen, thanks, Frank.
No.
Don, where's Richard?
No, we can't take
Richard, where are you?
He has got a bullet head. Look at
Get the middle. Get the middle, Frank.
Right there.
No, I would have put my jacket on.
No, you look great.
That's it.
Okay.
I want to not let us see my jacket.
This will go in Atlanta at the prison.
Hang on one second. Let's do the background.
You're making a movie, huh? Background, please, clear. It's a movie she's making.
How many are you going to use?
I am ready.
Well, you know.
I say shoot.
Shoot.
I got it.
Thank you.
Quiet. Thank you. very
Once again, Mr. Sinatra.
Daniel will sneak into the shop shortly.
You're good. We'll be looking at it when you come in.
Down to the beach? You going to the beach?
Okay, boss.
You going to the beach now?
I'm going to the beach now, yeah.
Great. Enjoy. Give
I'm on the beach, yeah.
I love it.
This way.
Take care.
I could play one of the machines.
Thanks a lot.
Oh,
That was me.
yep. So that was our.
That's a great clip.
So, you know.
I think it's a 4-minute clip. In and out.
And save the slap for the take.
It's to save the
Save
slap.
save the slap for the take,
That's
yeah.
it.
Well, when we came in, we said you may only get one take, Howard.
Mm-hmm.
So better make it good.
Mm-hmm.
And then when he said, "Let's do it again,"
Yeah.
it was a great day because, as I showed Tony O, he actually signed the SAG contract.
Yeah.
And I actually had him sign 2 SAG contracts because Don's late son Larry was a PA on the show. So Larry was working for me at the time. So I had Larry meet the car, and Larry was with him at all times. And then Larry walked him out to the car with Tony O. Mm-hmm. And I presented him 2 contracts, the second of which I kept.
Smart move.
And proudly hangs in my office.
Smart move, because he rarely signed contracts himself. He'd always say, "Go ahead, Tony, to take care of it."
Yeah, you told me there were 3 signatures: one that Frank signed, one that you signed, and one that the secretary signed.
Mm-hmm. Dorothy. Yeah. Hey, I didn't do it that much because I tried to get him to do as many as he could for true fans, so that they'd have something that was real. Yeah. But mine looked pretty close to his, but I tried not to do it too much. But having the 2 of them work, it was towards the end of Frank's performing career. So putting them together on a bill, in a venue that worked, like we opened the Kiel Center in St. Louis, and then we went right from backstage back into the car to the plane, flew to Chicago to open the United Center 2 days later, Rickles and Frank, which reminds me of a story that you're talking about how Rickles could be. We arrived in Chicago at the Ambassador East. Frank liked to stay. And we go downstairs. It's about 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning to have a late supper. And we're in the pump room. And I was sitting with Frank and Barbara, and with our backs to the wall. Naturally, that's the way Italians like to sit in a restaurant. And Rickles was on the other side of the table. And they brought Frank a steak and some French fries and a brand new bottle of ketchup. And so he opens the ketchup, and he's trying to get the ketchup to come out, and nothing's coming out. Now he's hitting the bottle, and people are looking like, "Oh, what's going on over there?" And I said, "Frank, if you stick your butter knife," he says, I got this, Tony. I got this. And he's slamming the bottle on the table. And he turns around, and he's really whacking the bottle, and he realizes people are looking at him. So now, just casually, he takes the bottle of ketchup, and he throws it over his shoulder, and it hits the wall, breaks, and there's ketchup running down the wall. And people at the table and various tables around the restaurant, "Oh, Jesus, Frank's in a bad mood. He's pissed off." And I kicked Rickles under the table, and I went like this, and he says, "Hey, Frank, what do you want, Don? Can you pass the ketchup?"
That was him.
But I love what you said before about that, and that really sums up Rickles, I guess. I mean, because you guys knew him, legit. The attitude, and the attitude of being insulting but not being insulting, like you wanted to get insulted.
Yeah, it was like being anointed.
Yeah,
I mean, he used to torture the hell out of my mother. Oh, what, he knew my mother was in the audience? "Oh, ladies and gentlemen, my manager Tony O's mother is in the audience tonight. Mama Rose, a former Broadway hooker." Says, "and she's really terrific chef. As a matter of fact, her biggest claim to fame is that she was the only chef at the Mussolini hanging."
Yeah, he was
ruthless. I mean, look what he did to me. You were at Don's memorial, weren't you?
Yes.
And I'll make the story short, but he used to say that comedy, in his mind, was the single best disinfectant for the most sensitive subject matter in the world. He said,
profound.
He says, as a people, we seem to have lost our ability to laugh with one another, and it seems like we always have to laugh at someone, and that's wrong. And long story short, I had come down. I was on my way to Atlantic City with Don. I had put together a gig of he and Joan Rivers at the convention center. And on the airplane, I felt this twitching on the side of my face. And I recognized it to be the onset of Bell's palsy, because I had had Bell's palsy once before when Jilly died. It's a combination of stress and fatigue, and I had to settle Jilly's estate. I was the one who had to tell Frank. Okay. So anyway, we're on the plane. I didn't say anything to Don. We get settled. The next day I wake up and my face was like this. And I went and we put the show together. I went back to collect Rickles to do the show. He opens the door of the suite and he's looking at me like I'm standing there. Not a word about my face. How's the house? How's the band? How's the dressing room? Okay, go do the show. Fantastic. In the dressing room after the show, having some booze with Joan Rivers and some other people, casino executives and stuff. And he says, well, I guess it falls to me to address the elephant in the room. And people are going, oh, geez, what's he going to do to Tony? Jesus Christ. And he says, you know, Tony, he says, you're in a room full of people who love, admire, and respect you. He says, but we took a vote and the results are unanimous. And I guess it falls to me to tell you, we who all love, admire, and respect you, we all agree that you are too short to play the lead in Phantom of the Opera.
Again, the attitude.
That's
like, yeah, just perfect. There's so many stories, right? I mean,
Don was probably the nicest man I ever met.
Absolute sweetheart.
And I don't know anybody who ever had a bad word to say about Don.
Nope. Everyone knew his heart. That's why.
Yep.
just to our audience, again, the book is In the Wee Small Hours, Sinatra and Me, Tony O. The stories are amazing, and they're stories of love, and you could see that they're real, you know, and that's really and the book is full of those kind of stories.
Yep.
It's a great, great read.
For sure.
Thank you.
Derek, you have a question?
Yeah, I got a bunch of questions, as usual.
Yeah, well,
First of all, we shouldn't forget we have a talented musician in the room, but we can save that for later if you like.
For sure, because I brought my grandfather's mandolin
wow.
in for Tony to play. So he's going to play it before we leave, that's for sure.
All right, so the question I have is, so it's a tough situation, I would think, when you have people that have talent and they are put on a pedestal, and you know, there's I suppose that ego gets involved. That situation where you had to perform for Frank, how do musicians deal with accepting if another musician is better, has more talent than they do? Because you're looking for a cosign almost, you know.
Yeah. I mean, and I purposely tried my best to work with musicians who in my opinion, were superior to me. I had enough confidence to know that I would never embarrass myself, but working with people who are better than you helps you step up to the next level. You'd be surprised what someone will be able to pull out of you that even you didn't know was there.
Right.
And so it was very gratifying to be working with those guys, Joe Patrone and Lou Berryman, because these guys were just monster musicians.
Right.
And also, you know, I have a good friend in Kentucky by the name of Jim Richardson. And Jim was beating around trying to be a musician. He was a pretty good singer, pretty good guitar player. But then he realized after 7 or 8 years of beating around the bush and just playing AAA clubs, that he was a AAA talent. And he was never going to make it to the major leagues.
Yeah.
And then he stopped, and now he plays on weekends, and he's a very, very successful financial advisor.
Yeah.
And he still gets his rocks off by playing on weekends.
Well, I mean, it was a difficult decision for me to give up my performing career.
Yes, because you were a great talent, and you had to put your career on the back burner in order to have the alliance that you had with Frank, and then obviously Don later. Yeah,
and the music business had changed considerably. As I said, I was fortunate to have had a 3-year contract with Harris in Lake Tahoe. I worked Vegas, and the Tahoe contract was 4 months a year, 1 month each season. But the music industry completely turned its back on the Great American Songbook and jazz, and they turned to disco and grunge and heavy metal because it was far less expensive to produce, and they had a wider audience, and so it was getting more and more difficult to get classy gigs doing what was my forte.
Yeah.
So I walked away from it, started producing TV, but that's when Frank started saying, hey, you know, if you're not busy shooting a show, can you come with me here? Can you go with me there? And that's how that came to be.
And for the last 25 years, or 23 years or whatever since Frank passed, you've been very busy. You've been producing. You were producing everything for Don Rickles. You were producing specials. Yeah. You're writing. You wrote the book. You produced a documentary for BBC about Frank. So, you know, you're still working at the major league level.
Yeah, I just fortunate. Thank you, and I'm very fortunate. I just partnered, my business partner and I, Michael Guarnera, who was an actor first. I met him that way. Our production company, Winbrook Entertainment, we just partnered with Judd Apatow to do for lack of another term, a documentary loosely called Rickles and Newhart, A Hollywood Bromance.
Wow.
Wow.
Terrific.
Celebrating the 60-year friendship that both Don and Bob and Barbara and Ginny enjoyed.
So let me show you how show business works.
Yeah.
We got a great book called Combustible. Can you pitch it to Judd Apatow? Only kidding. Only kidding.
I mean,
On a serious note,
exactly how it works.
on a serious note,
That's how it works.
yeah, and here's 20 and tell that critic it's a good book. When you talked about how working with the best brings out the best in you, that really triggered something with me because I'm a big fan of Sinatra, and who isn't a fan of Sinatra? You know, but one of the things that always impressed me about him was he always sang the best songs with the best arrangements, with the best orchestras. I mean, always class, always number one. I mean, the Nelson Riddle years after From Here to Eternity. I mean, those songs are incredible.
Yeah.
The arrangements, you know, my favorite Sinatra song is "I've Got You Under My Skin,"
Mm-hmm.
and that break and that when he goes off.
Do you know the backstory to that?
No, but I'd love to know it.
Okay. They were doing an album at Capitol, and you could only have so much time on a record, on a vinyl. And they realized that they had time for yet one more song on this particular album that they were doing. And Frank called Nelson the night before the session, and he said, listen, we've got enough room for another tune. They had a recording session the next day to record the last 3 songs, but then he realized he could do a 4th. And so Nelson said, well, what do you want to do? You're leaving on tour. He says, tomorrow's the last day of the recording session. He says, well, there's this tune, I've Got You Under My Skin. He says, write me a chart. So Nelson, the next day, instead of driving himself to the studio, he had a friend drive him in his station wagon, and he sat in the back seat with a piece of plywood and paper, and he wrote the arrangement on his way from Malibu to Capitol Records.
Wow.
In the car.
Wow.
That's
And that's an amazing break
Wow.
with that arrangement. Just amazing.
Uh-huh.
Yep. You know, talk about Capitol Records. I was at Capitol Records recording once with Tony Bennett.
Oh, great.
And
Whoa.
Tony was going to appear on Suddenly Susan.
Uh-huh.
And he was going to appear doing Stepping Out.
Oh, yeah.
So Ralph was on the piano.
Ralph Sharon.
Ralph Sharon was on the piano, and Tony was. It was a great experience for me. And didn't Tony approach you about?
Tony wanted me to work with him. This was after Frank passed away. And I was very, very flattered. And I told him, I said, listen, after being with Sinatra, the only 2 singers that I would even consider working with is you and Luciano Pavarotti. I said, but, you know, I had aging parents, and I had moved them from New York to California, and Tony was on the road 48 weeks a year. And I said, you know, I really do appreciate it. I'm flattered. I said, but I have to pass. I said, because I don't know how much time my folks have. And I don't want to be away from having moved them from New York to California, and then I'm going to go on the road for 48 weeks. That's not cool.
I think Sinatra called Tony Bennett the greatest saloon singer he ever heard, which is a hell of a compliment.
Sinatra, believe it or not, had a hand in resurrecting Tony to the younger audience, okay? Pierre Cossette, who used to produce the Grammys, called and asked me if Frank would do this gimmick piece with the Red Hot Chili Peppers.
Wow.
And so I said, I'll run it past him. I says, but I'm not sure. So the next moment, I picked my time, and I explained to Frank what they were looking to do. And he says, what, are you kidding? He says, I got an idea. He says, tell him to call Tony Bennett. So I called Pierre Cossette back, and I said, Frank's words, call Tony Bennett.
Whoa.
He called Tony Bennett. Tony Bennett did it, and all of a sudden,
Wow.
the younger generation discovered
fantastic.
Tony Bennett.
What a story.
Yeah. I mean, Danny Bennett,
His son had a lot.
Danny takes good care of him, but that's how that
Wow.
thing at the Grammys.
And how did Frank feel about duets? I mean, that was a huge album, and
you had a big part in that. Tony's fingerprints are all over those albums.
You know, I was not a producer on it. I mean, but being a singer, I sensed his apprehensions, and he almost walked away from the project.
Because he works alone. He works alone.
Well, no, he loved doing duets.
Yeah.
But he wanted to do everything live right now.
Right.
The orchestra and you and me together in the same room. He was unaccustomed to doing things in pieces, which is the way most recording artists record these days. And that's the conversation I had with him. I said, listen, because when he was told that they were going to go in and record his stuff and then put the other stuff together in post-production, no. The electricity can't be there, no, it's not going to work. And originally the idea for the album was his in the first place.
Really?
Well, because he was watching Carson and all those great shows, and the younger artists, who's your favorite performer, what's your favorite song? And a lot of them would say Frank Sinatra, such and such. And that's where he came up with the idea initially, and then Phil Ramone and everyone else came into the fold. But I said to him, I said, listen, I know how you feel about doing everything right now, in the moment. I said, but these other artists, they go in, they record the rhythm section. They go in a week later, they do the brass. They go in a week later, they do the strings. 3 weeks down the road, they go into an isolation booth and they lay down the vocal. I said, that's the way they're accustomed to recording now. I said, so some of these artists, even if we're able to make the touring schedules work where they're in town when you're in town, they walk into Studio A, the legendary Studio A, and see a 60-piece orchestra live and look across the room and see that face. I said, you know what you're going to get from these people? Dust is what you're going to get.
Hamina.
And then to reinforce what I said to him, I said, you remember we were down the desert listening to music, I says, and that great rendition of Unforgettable came on. He said, oh yeah, what a great record. I said, well, Frank, let me ask you this. It's 1992. He says, yeah. I said, how long has Nat King Cole been dead? And he said, oh yeah, they could put her voice with a dead guy. I said, exactly.
That's terrific.
I had no idea that was his idea, Sinatra, to do the duets, really.
Yeah, it was. It was. And he thoroughly enjoyed it. He really did.
And look at Tony Bennett today with Lady Gaga. I mean, what a duo. Who could expect them two to be the Gracie, the duet of all time? Terrific.
Did you see the 60 Minutes piece on him?
Yeah.
Heartbreaking. Yeah, it was
absolutely.
Heart-touching,
yeah.
But again, the book is Sinatra and Me, Tony O's memories and love of Frank Sinatra, and it comes out in the book, and it's really well written.
Thank you.
It's a terrific book.
It's
Derek,
a terrific book. Nobody else could write it.
Do you have any further questions?
I do, since I got a couple Italians in the room. Thoughts on Sopranos, the movie? I mean, the series,
the TV show.
Yeah. I heard you speak. The reason why I asked is because I heard you speak Italian.
Yes.
And it was so much better than what they did on the show.
Oh, well. That's what happens. You know, I give you there's a popular chain, Italian restaurant chain. The Something Garden.
Okay.
Oh.
Yeah.
And
this is for you, Dad.
And this is, with all due respect, it's the Denny's of Italian food. And yet I was going into this place. I was down in Riverside with a buddy of mine visiting his parents. And I said, where are we going to take them for dinner? There's no really good restaurant. Oh, we're going to go to the blah, blah garden. I said, oh, geez. Okay. I said, well, okay. I'll order fettuccine Alfredo. They can't screw that up. He said, no, the food's really good. Really good. I said, okay. So we go in, we sit down, and the waitress comes over, young, blonde girl. And I said to her, what's the soup of the day? And there is a soup dish. We in dialect call it pasta fazool.
Right.
Okay. And it's spelled pasta, P-A-S-T-A, E meaning and, F-A-G-I-O-L-I. Fagioli is the proper pronunciation. And I said, so what's the soup of the day? She says, Pasta fagioli.
Well, give me some of that in the manicotti.
And I looked at my buddy. I said, I rest my case.
I believe I got stuck at that same place in Riverside, actually.
Oh,
That was my introduction to not Italian food.
Pasta fagioli.
pasta fagioli. Yeah.
You hear that, Dad?
Yeah, that pops down that joint. But yeah, just a terrific book.
Thank you.
And
Really, really enjoyed it.
you got
I do have one more
Eric,
question.
one more question.
What are your thoughts on Prince, the singer, the artist?
Extremely talented.
Okay, great.
And will sorely be missed.
Yes. All right.
Is sorely
And,
missed.
So it's Halloween. No, I know that. But you got a Halloween story for us? Not related. Just Tony will hear.
You want a Halloween story? I'll give you an Irish ghost story. How
Okay,
about that?
Irish
I've
ghost
never
story.
told the story before.
Get ready.
But this is supposedly true as God. Now it's going to sound like something out of an true as God. Something out of an Alfred Hitchcock show. It's going to sound like something out of Outer Limits.
Okay, get on with it.
There's a man named Dermot Donoghue, and he's walking in a small village called Dingle.
What are you
West
looking at
Coast.
Derek for? Look
telling the
look
story
at
all
our
three
guest.
times.
Yeah, I'm
With the
listening.
camera.
All right.
He's
So-
off camera.
Anyway, he's walking to this small village in Dingle. It's one of these bitter, foggy nights in Ireland, and it's lashing rain, lashing. And of course, he's trying to get a ride, and he's to get out of the rain, and he's trying to hitchhike, but there's no cars coming by. Finally, he sees two lights in the distance going very slowly towards him. And it goes up a little incline, and the car stops right near him, and he jumps in the car. And he's just delighted to get out of the rain, and he looks over, and there's nobody driving the car. And the engine's not even on. So now he's trembling with fear, And the car starts to go down this little decline, and it's heading for a curve. And with this, a hand comes in the window. It doesn't touch him, doesn't bother him, but starts turning the wheel. Now he starts praying. He's scared to death altogether. Well, he sees a pub in the distance. He jumps out of the car. He runs into the pub. He's soaking wet. He orders 3 fingers of Irish whiskey. He slugs it down, and he's sobbing now. He's just sobbing. 3 more fingers of Irish whiskey. Sobbing again. 2 guys walk in, and they're soaking wet, and they sit down at the pub next to him. And now he starts to tell the tale, and the bar is in a hush because they realize he's not drunk, but he's crying. And he starts to tell the tale, and one guy says to the other, he goes, Paddy, that must be that fucking Egypt that jumped in the car we were pushing. An Irish ghost story.
An Irish ghost story. So, well, Tony picks up the mandolin to play us out. I just want to give a shout out to our sponsor, weekendcoffee.com. They make fine coffee delivered straight to your door. Weekend Coffee also donates a bag for every 10 you buy to fire responders and first responders.
Yes.
So again,
Veterans.
thank you for your patronage. And Tony, can you play us out a little mandolin music
For Billy.
for Billy? Okay, now enough of that
One for
Irish
you.
crap. I'm smart. I'm smart.
Beautiful.
We'll see you next week, folks. Thanks for
Thanks
joining
so
us.
much for tuning in.
Thanks
Don't
for
forget
Tony
the
O.
book.
And don't,
Sinatra and Me in the wee small hours.
And
God damn it, buy the book.
and don't forget our tree books.
Yeah, and our 3 books too. Buy 4.
Buy 4.
Read. It's good for you.
What did your friend say?
Which one? I only got 1 or 2 friends.
Well, then it should be hard. Should be hard to remember which one.
Tony, I want you to show the audience what you were playing with.
I was going to say, for those musicians out there, I'm a little bit better than this. However,
Yeah.
they didn't have a pick, and I'm true Sicilian. I'm playing the mandolin with the tip of a broken knife.
And,
Right here.
and you are playing my grandfather's mandolin.
That's fantastic.
That's
That's terrific.
a great.
It's an honor.
Well, thank
It's
you.
an honor.
Thank you.
Thank you guys for having
Thank
me.
you. It was an honor for us to have you, Tony. Again,
Appreciate it.
great storytelling.
Great.
And thank you. And the
Thank you,
book is great. So
How do,
great.
how do you say bye in Italian?
Ciao.
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 That's the same way.
Ciao.
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 Yeah, that's what you don't do at Blank Gardens.
Yeah.
That must be the fucking reason to jump into the car.
Bye, folks.
Goodbye, folks.
Ciao. Next week's guest, songwriter and composer, member of the Songwriters Hall of Fame, Steve Dorff. We'll see you next week.